There we go. We're live streaming.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for the Richmond Regional Transportation Planning Organization Technical Advisory Committee. Today is Tuesday, February 14th. It's 9 a.m. and we're happy to have you all here today. I call this RRTPO TAC Meeting to order. The number 2 on the agenda is a statement regarding virtual meetings. Chet, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think we need to read anything today. I did want to let the group know that we are continuing to track the legislation in the General Assembly that may impact our ability to meet remotely, as well as the declarations by the federal administration. So if there's any changes and updates in terms of our ability to keep doing virtual meetings, we'll certainly reach out and let everyone know as soon as possible.
That sounds good. Thanks for the update. Number 3 on the agenda is roll call and certification of a quorum. Ms. Firestone, would you please proceed with roll call?
Yes, ma'am. Town of Ashland, Miss Amos.
Here.
Charles City County, Mr. Mitchell. Miss Russell. Chesterfield County, Miss Smith.
Here.
Miss Walker. Goochland County, Mr. Goyne.
Here.
Mr. Coleman. Hanover County, Mr. Badunez. Mr. Flagg. Henrico County, Chair Smidler.
Here.
Mr. Yor. New Canton County, Miss Inman.
Hi, here. Good morning.
Good morning, thank you. Miss LeDuc. Powhatan County, Mr. Shardine. City of Richmond, Miss Clark.
Good morning, here.
Good morning. Capital Region Airport Commission, Mr. Rutledge. RRTPO, Ms. Dubinsky. Mr. Wagner.
Here.
Thank you. GRTC, Ms. Sink. Mr. Robinson. Plan RVA, Mr. Parsons.
Here.
Mr. Ariel.
Here.
Right Finders, Ms. Tisdale. Mr. O'Keefe.
Here.
RMTA, Ms. Simmons. VDOT, Ms. McAdory.
Good morning. Here.
Good morning. Ms. Mueller.
I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning. And then also from, sorry, go back to GRTC, Ms. Robinson.
Good morning, I'm here.
Good morning. That concludes the roll call for attendance, and we do have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Firestone. Let's see, next is number 4, consideration of amendments to the meeting agenda. Are there any amendments to the agenda? All right, hearing none. There's a lot on there for us to discuss. It's gonna be a busy meeting, but all right, so no amendments to the agenda. Next up, number 5, approval of the January 10th, 2023 TAC meeting minutes. Is there anybody like to make a motion for approval?
This is Liz. So moved. Barb, second.
Thank you. Ms. Farr, let's see, voice vote. All those in favor? Aye.
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 Aye. Anybody need to abstain who wasn't present?
I'll abstain. This is Amy from
Okay. Thank you. Any opposed? Not to the abstention, but opposed to the meeting minutes or edits? Okay, hearing none. The meeting minutes are approved. Number 6, open public comment period. Check the chat. I don't see anything in the chat. Mr. Parsons, did we receive anything prior to the meeting?
We did not. There are a couple folks in the meeting as attendees, but they are, looks like City of Richmond staff, as well as Mr. Williams. No public comment as far as we know.
Okay, thank you. All right, number 7, TAC Chairman's Report. Nothing to report this month. And number 8 on the agenda is RRTPO update. Mr. Parsons and Mr. Ariel.
I don't think we have an update today, given the breadth of the agenda. I think we'd unless there's any questions of staff, we're happy to continue on.
Okay. Number 9 is Transit Assessment Management Performance Targets. This is an action item. Ms. Ryan, please go ahead.
Oh, good morning, Madam Chair and members of TAC, and I hope you all can hear me well. Okay, today I'm requesting tax action on the Tier 2 Transit Asset Management Performance Targets. And just like the federal performance targets required of the highway system, the transit systems have their own set of federally required targets. These targets are found in a Transit Asset Management Plan, or a TAM plan, and the transit agencies have the option of developing their own individual TAM plan, or they can participate in a group plan. DRPT sponsors a group Tier 2 TAM plan, and this plan was published on October 1st, 2022, after being adopted by the 33 Tier 2 transit agencies in the state. Bay Transit, which operates in Charles City and New Kent, is the Tier 2 transit agency in the RRTPO study area, and Bay Transit has adopted the group Tier 2 TAM targets. Once adopted by the TPO, the performance targets will be included in the TIP, and the specific targets are listed on page 9 of the agenda. So the following resolution is presented to TAC for review and recommendation to the RRTPO for approval. Resolved that the RRTPO Policy Board adopts the FFY 2022 Tier 2 TAM targets and incorporates them into the Transportation Improvement Program.
Are there any questions for Ms. Ryan?
I'll move to approve.
Is there a second?
Tyrona, second.
Any discussion? Hearing
I
none.
didn't
Ms.
catch
Fire.
who made the motion. I'm sorry. Who made that motion?
It was Amy Inman, right? And then the second by Diana Clark.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And Ms. Firestone, if you could do a roll call vote, please.
Yes, ma'am. Miss Amos,
Aye.
Miss Smith,
Aye.
Mr. Goyne. Do we have Mr. Goyne? We'll circle back. Chair Smidler,
Aye.
Miss Inman,
Aye.
Miss Clark,
Aye.
Mr. Wagner,
Aye.
Miss Robinson,
Aye.
Mr. Parsons,
Aye.
Mr. O'Keefe,
Aye.
and Miss McAdory.
Aye.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call for that item, and the motion carries.
It looks like Mr. Goyne dropped off, so we'll watch and make sure he gets back in if he tries to rejoin.
Okay.
Sounds good. Number 10 on the agenda is fiscal year 21 through 24 TIP amendment for the I-64 gap improvement, segment A. This is an action item. Mr. Bushing?
Okay, good morning, Madam Chair, members of TAC. So this item is a proposed tip amendment from VDOT. If you'll recall, back in November, the TPO took action to add 2 sections of the I-64 gap to the tip. And at that time, both projects were only included as PE only. And so it was getting the PE work started, state funded. This request is for segment A, to add the right-of-way and construction phases. This is a fully state funded request, so everything on it is state dollars. And there's an RFP scheduled for the spring with the design build contract in the fall. So the purpose of adding this in is to reflect that RFP is getting ready to go out. As you know, revising the TIP requires us to demonstrate that this is able to be funded and then have a public review process as well as the TAC and TPO review. So this is an overview map of the segments. So segment A is the purple section. So essentially exits 205 to 214. And here's the proposal. So the total cost of the project isn't changing. The only thing that's changing is we're adding the right-of-way and construction phases, which were not previously included. So it's $1 million for right-of-way in FY23 and just under 250 million for construction. Again, all in state funding, so no impact to any federal obligations. The reason this project's included in the TIP is because it is regionally significant. It is a capacity project. So the request that is before you today is to provide a recommendation to the board on the proposed resolution, which essentially just states what I said, that you're adding $1 million for right-of-way in FY23 and 249.8 million for construction in fiscal year 23 as well. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions about this. And if I need to, I can defer to VDOT for any specifics on the schedule as well.
All right, I'm not hearing any questions for Mr. Bushing. Would anybody like to make a motion?
Make a motion to approve.
Is there a second?
This is Liz. I'll second.
Any discussion? And sorry, I was just checking the chat. No discussion. Ms. Firestone, could you please take a roll call vote?
Yes, ma'am. Miss Amos,
Aye.
Miss Smith,
Aye.
Chair Smidler,
Aye.
Miss Inman,
Aye.
Miss Clark,
Aye.
Mr. Wagner,
Aye.
Miss Robinson,
Aye.
Mr. Parsons,
Aye.
Mr. O'Keefe,
Aye.
and Miss McAdory.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Okay, and I did get a message from Mr. Goyne that he had to hop off the call, but he will try to join later. So we'll, like you said, just keep an eye out for that. All right. Number 11 is project cost estimating and overruns. And Mr. Bushing will present about this. As you know, we've talked about this in our last TAC meeting, and this has been discussed in TPO. And Miles, please go ahead.
Sure. Thank you again, Madam Chair. So just a little bit of background. So this whole conversation essentially started last spring when we were developing the allocations plan. There were a handful of projects that were surprises that had cost increases that were unexpected by the sponsor. And that led to a whole discussion at the policy board in terms of cost estimating, what happens with these. And I think a large part of that was also we hadn't selected any new projects in a couple rounds at that point. So that's sort of the background that teed up this whole conversation. The policy board has been working with staff on this. And what we were directed to do last was to review all the existing projects which were presented at the January policy board meeting. And a link to that was included in your agenda packet. As part of that presentation, one of the things that we wanted to make sure the board was aware of was the AASHTO cost estimating curves, that effectively the less you know about a project, the bigger the range of where the cost is actually going to wind up on your estimate. Most of our projects are selected very early on in the process, the planning stage. There's not a lot of work that's been done. So the expected range is pretty large. I mean, you can see class 5 is up to 300% of the cost estimate, and class 4 down here, which is kind of the high end of where we are, it's still 175% of the cost estimate. So the range is pretty large on where those estimates can fall out. As part of the review, what we found was across the entire program, our median project was 26% increase in cost from the initial estimate when it first went into the 6-year program into where it was in 2023. There were several older projects which were significantly higher and really raised the mean, the average, which is why we were reporting on the median. And most of those projects were one of two cases, really. It was either projects from the 90s or early 2000s that have just, it's a long life. The projects have evolved in scope over time. There were periods where nothing was happening on them as funds were accumulating, so the cost was changing. So there's just a very extended history, and kind of everything that could go wrong sort of in a project went wrong on those. And then there's the others that were more recent projects where it was tended to be more of just an underestimate on the what that scope would actually cost. So that's kind of the two trends that we saw, but basically the increases were largely long periods of inactivity, rescoping and changing requirements, and then changing project administration when it switched from a locally administered project to VDOT administered, different costs there, which were reflected as the projects were updated. So our current approach to overruns is that a project is eligible for additional TPO funding as long as the sponsor completes the twice-a-year reporting. So that's the little check-ins on where you're at, what's your next step, has the cost changed, has the schedule changed. The other piece of the guidance is that sponsors should seek funding elsewhere, whether it's local, state, or other federal funding sources before coming back to the TPO. If they do come back, then up to 10% cost increase from the initial award is something that the TAC can approve. Beyond that 10% requires the full policy board to approve it. And the options that are available include using balance entry, swapping funds. So if you have a project that is changing schedule, you can swap it with another one that is farther out and move funds around, reducing the scope, requiring a sponsor to use other funds, or deselecting the project. So those are all options that the TAC and the board have available to them. We also have a reserve policy in place. So we have a balance entry that scales up the farther out you are. And the idea is that we are able to select some projects, year 3, rather than having to wait all the way to year 6 as that decreases, moving forward each year. And then it also leaves us funding in those early years that if a project is ready to go to construction, for example, and it's short, we still have 10% in reserve in year 1 that we can use to fix those deficits and make sure that those projects are able to move forward in those really time-sensitive cases. Some other recent policy changes related to estimates, scope changes. So we no longer accept scope changes as a rationale for additional funding. So that was something that was implemented as part of the update in 2021. The scope can be trimmed, as I mentioned before, to stay within budget, but increases to the scope are not accepted as a reason for requesting additional funds. And if the project is no longer viable with that scope, and then the funding doesn't stay with the sponsor, which is something old funding used to do. Pre-2008, it stayed with the project sponsor. Now all funding comes back to the TPO to be reallocated. So that's sort of a change that was intended to address some of those older projects that we were talking about earlier. The other piece with on-time delivery is we have explicitly incorporated the state requirements that projects are required to obligate funds within a year of allocation. So that was not directly stated anywhere in our guidelines. So that's now part of the TPO's policy as well. which basically requires if you're not going to obligate when you have funding awarded, then you need to let us know so we can reprogram it and shuffle the money around as needed. If you don't provide notice through the regular progress reports or through an application to shift funding, and the project hasn't started, the guidelines do allow for the project to be deselected and deallocated. So with all of this in mind, what the policy board has looked at and directed TAC to do was really two things. The first was the spreadsheet that I sent out the latest version this morning. Hopefully everyone received it. But that's really an explanation of the origin or the cause of each of the projects that have increased in cost. Basically what happened, why was it changed from when we originally picked the project. The second part of it was to review our current projects, cost overruns, and provide direction on how to better address cost estimating and cost overruns, and really in particular, the impact that they have on the TPO's funding programs. I think the goal here is really to ensure that we're not consistently using up all of the funding to address existing projects. Because that's really where the sort of the origin of all this came from. So some of the options that the board forwarded along for consideration included using more conservative assumptions. So this would be something like Smart Scale, where everyone across the board is using VDOT assumptions, requiring risk-based contingencies rather than, I think a lot of times with the estimates we have, 10% for PE or 20% for PE, but it's not really anything specific to any piece of the PE. It's just kind of a flat number. So looking into more risk-based contingencies, which again matches with the state's evolving practice as well. The second option they looked at was increasing project definition before selection. So essentially moving to the right on the x-axis of the AASHTO curves. So that would require more engineering upfront, 10% or 30% design before you come and request TPO funding. The next is reducing program exposure. So this is focused on awarding a fixed dollar amount or only a single phase. So if the project does increase significantly in cost, it doesn't have as much of an impact because we're locked into only a portion of the project, essentially. And then the fourth option they looked at was improving time to delivery. So really focusing on awarding funding contingent on specific project schedules. So those were four options that the board forwarded along for the TAC to discuss. They also said TAC can provide any additional ideas as well. They're really looking for TAC to provide guidance on what's the problem and what, if anything, do we need to address through policy changes. And that's really everything on this item. I'm happy to answer any questions about the board and everything that's gone on previously. But otherwise, this is really mostly a discussion item with TAC sort of setting the direction here.
Let's see, somebody has their hand raised. Ms. Smith, go ahead.
Thanks, Miles. As we went through the exercise to look at some of the projects that had overages and, tie that to whatever, I think something that's important to include when we're discussing this issue with the board is that inflation hadn't been taken into account in the past. So we would submit an application and, we would want the money in the first year, but we wouldn't get it. And so a lot of times requests down the road really were just addressing inflation. So that 26% or whatever you were showing up there lines up with, 3% inflation for, 7 or 8 years. Another question I had as you were going through was scope change, the definition of that. For example, we have a project on Route 1 that was submitted as a bike lane with sidewalk. And then the fall line, Ashland to Petersburg study was done. And there was a desire for the trail, multi-use trail. So we changed from the bike lane sidewalk to the multi-use trail. Is that considered a scope change?
So, and I think this is probably one of the areas that needs strengthening in the policy as part of this discussion. There is no definition. literally is just left at scope change right now. So I think that's the current approach would be to bring it to TAC to discuss whether that constitutes a scope change or not. I think in terms of what we looked at from the historic performance, it's less of, a bike ped project that became a slightly different bike ped project to, a widening project that became a complete streets multimodal improvement with no widening element. I mean, I think it's more of those.
Or it was going to be this long, now it's this long.
Exactly, or it was an intersection, but then it added a few hundred feet on either side and it was widening as well. So it's some of those projects where it's the termini extended, or just the entire scope of the project in terms of what was trying to be accomplished had changed. I think those were the bigger ones that we saw in the estimate review. And I think that's more of what we had in mind when we were writing the guidelines originally. But I think the current approach, as I said, would be bring it to TAC to confirm that.
Yeah. So I probably defined some of the reasons for overruns as scope changes when it was really more of design refinement or something, Let's see. Then as we were looking at these 4 recommendations, I think we've talked about number 2, increase project definition and requiring 10%, 30% design. I think that's going to be really hard for some of the smaller localities. I mean, it'd be hard for us to make that a requirement. And then reducing program exposure, I didn't think that you could even use RSTP to fund just PE.
So what that would entail would essentially be RSTP is only leveraging funds, or it's the finishing piece when you have something else leveraged. So effectively, the TPO would only be picking up a portion of the project and the rest is coming from somewhere else. But you are correct. We couldn't just fund this, for example, right away and have that as a standalone project.
You'd have to see the other sources. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. All right. That's all for me.
Thank you. Janice, could you please move Joe Vidunas with Hanover over as a panelist?
I believe he's having a connection problem. I've tried several
Okay.
times and he's not responding, but I have noted that he's present and hopefully we can move him over as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you for the update.
There he goes. I think he just was able to accept the panelist invitation.
Okay, great. Miles, I know you had given an update to some of the TPO members just about cost estimates. And I remember them saying in TPO that was really helpful and appreciated that. Would you mind just giving TAC a short update about that?
Sure. So that conversation, it was a follow-up to the board meeting, and it was a summer school, as the board members called it. So it was really just kind of a walkthrough of how cost estimating works in terms of, how much information how good the estimates are, and also explaining sort of the calculations in the summary that we had given to the board in terms of how we were establishing a baseline and what we were looking at on each of those projects. The other big piece of that was a discussion about locally administered projects and whether local estimates and locally administered projects were something that we, what's the benefit essentially to having locally administered projects or locally provided estimates as opposed to everything going through VDOT. So those were the 2 pieces of it. I think by the end of the conversation, and I think looking at the fact that it was about 75% of our program that was locally administered, there was an understanding that there was obviously a need to accommodate that approach to project delivery. And I think they were just more comfortable in general with the process of estimating and with our review process for the projects.
Thank you, Miles. Ms. Inman, I see your hand raised.
Hi, yeah, thank you. So just a quick question. Is the presentation that you've just given, was it in the agenda package or was it made available? Because I'm not seeing it.
No, the PowerPoint is not in the agenda packet. It'll be posted after the meeting.
Okay, so is this an action item? that you're asking?
Yes, so these items that are in the agenda packet, the 4 considerations in here, so that's in the agenda packet as part of the direction. Let me see if I can.
Yeah, I can jump in. I think the hope is that the policy board has asked for direction from the TAC. So today would be the earliest possible date for the TAC to come to a decision. Staff has approached this with the flexibility, we'll say, to provide these as options for TAC consideration. Obviously, TAC can change or update or not provide a recommendation, but we certainly want everyone to be comfortable moving forward to provide some feedback to the board at some point. So even if there is an action today, we all know that the board is looking for some type of recommendation from the TAC.
Yeah, and I apologize. Obviously this is my first TAC meeting back in Richmond. So, and I know this is an ongoing issue, but I would like to have a little more time myself to understand what these are and what the impacts would be. Because I think, as was previously mentioned, having the project development happen a little, upfront, which I think is logical, right? I mean, I think everybody would like to have more project development before we fully funded a project, so that we have a better sense of, number one, what the project is, so that we have less, potential for scope changes or, projects being redefined, even if they are just a bike lane. Now it's coming into a multi-use path. Well, fundamentally, those are 2 different things. So, if you had the project development happening up front, then maybe those questions would be answered and you'd have a better project going forward with the public and all that. So, but knowing that VDOT and, that project development funding really isn't available, it makes that, it does make that a challenge, particularly for smaller localities. So, I guess I would want to be confident that these parameters are just parameters. They're not something that's going to be a requirement or something that's going to be further, I guess, ingrained into this process if a project does have an increased cost estimate. So I guess if you're looking for an action today, I would probably have to abstain, just because I don't have enough information. Thank you.
Thank you for your feedback. I saw Ms. Smith's hand first and Ms. Clark, then Ms. Clark. So go ahead.
For the first one, use more conservative assumptions. I wanted to just mention that in Tri-Cities, with CMAQ and RSTP, VDOT reviews the estimates that are submitted by the applicants. And that's the VDOT district office. And they don't smart scale it all the way. They're a little bit more reasonable with the estimating. So, and there's a little bit more dialogue and a chance to kind of explain things. So that's working well in Tri-Cities. Of course, that's a smaller program, so it might be easier for the district to manage that volume of estimates to review. But, at first blush, it seems like number one is certainly something we can do. And I also wanted to make sure that when we're discussing this with the policy board, that we're letting them know that our estimating process has evolved through the years. And a lot of the projects that we're looking at in the list that just look terrible with overruns are old projects. And, like the inflation thing I mentioned before, we're addressing that. Already we're working in more contingencies and doing a better job with reviews, even at the local level. We've kind of had some lessons learned, and we're constantly improving on the estimating. So I think that's important to point out also.
Thank you. I know Diana was next. Liz, did you want to respond to one of Barb's comments, or did you have a separate?
It was, yes, it was in response to Barb's comment. Thanks. I just
Okay.
wanted to, she's absolutely 100% correct. That's what we're doing for Tri-Cities. And we actually started that process with the TPO. We've been, quote unquote, validating the RSTP CMAQ applications for a couple of cycles now. But what we do, and Miles, chime in if I mess this up, but I think typically we provide that information to TPO staff, and they work with you guys to decide if the project's probably going to be locally administered. They lean more towards you guys, and then other way around for if it's not going to be locally administered, and that's what goes into the staff recommendation. Did I get that right, Miles?
Yes, that's correct. And I think the other thing that I'd just like to add is the framework actually envisions that coordination happening directly between localities and VDOT before the application cycle. Given COVID and everything over the past couple of years, we haven't been able to implement that fully, but the intent as written in the framework document is that the localities would be working directly with the district to validate those estimates on the front end. So when it's submitted, you have your locality estimate, VDOT's review, and all that information is provided up front. So there's no surprises. The intent on that was to avoid the smart scale situation effectively there. The locality goes in thinking they have one number and the leveraging they need, and it comes out with a different number at the end of the process. So we were trying to kind of get rid of that as an element of surprise in the scoring process. But as I mentioned, it hasn't been successful yet. Hopefully this next round we'll be able to figure something out. But the idea would be you coordinate that during the summer, and then the applications kick off during the fall. You already have VDOT's review in hand.
Thank you. Ms. Clark?
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, my question is just rather a statement in looking at some of this. Would it be possible, it looks like there's a mixture of what Plan RVA will do versus, say, the applicants. Is there a way like to discern? Because when I look at number 2, I'm feeling like that's an applicant requirement, or something that the applicant would have to do before, versus number 1 is where it's VDOT. I just want to know what kind of direct impacts to the applicant does this policy direction direct us to have to do. Again, with looking at number 2, it says like more engineering up front. As an applicant, I'm thinking I will need to bring a project that I want to have funded to have 10% design. Is that the only to do out of this list that would be the responsibility of the applicant?
If I may, Madam Chair, I think that would be the one that would be largely on the applicant. Number 1 would be a coordinated process, obviously, with the localities and with the district. Number 3 is really just, and 4 are really management on the Plan RVA or TPO staff side. So I think 3 and 4 is essentially we could implement today pretty readily. 1 requires, evolving that process in coordination with VDOT a bit more strongly. And number 2 would be a shift on how localities prepare for the application cycle. So I think you're correct in that.
And then, Madam Chair, Chet, you said that there is time to approve this. What's our time frame?
Sure, thank you, Madam Chair. I think especially after sitting down privately with Dr. Nabel and Mr. Williams, I think there's an understanding of how complex this issue is. So there's not a rush to make a snap decision on the part of the board, but they do want to have some type of a resolution as soon as possible. So I think they understand that TAC has a big recommendation to make here, and obviously I don't think the estimate issues are going to go away. So as much thought as TAC can put into it before coming to a recommendation, I think is appreciated. But, you know, they've been talking about this for a couple months, and they want to see what the options are.
And then, Madam Chair, if I could finally, just to slightly in agreement with Ms. Inman in that the one thing that is of the applicant, that 10%, I think with, you know, CBTA having some of the planning dollars available, we will have to kind of look across some of the other programs and how we make funds available for those planning dollars, or that will get us that 10%, 30% design engineering for localities before kind of imposing that that be a recommendation that the localities get to before selection. I think just from past experience, I've known that the planning dollars aren't there in this region to start off projects from the idea into getting a good cost estimate. So we would have to ensure that there's a pathway to achieving that in order to, I think, require that.
Good point, Ms. Clark. Yes. Yeah, so we don't have to choose all 4 of these, and we're open to other options. I see pros and cons with each one. I like, some consistent conservative assumptions and, improving time to delivery. And the others are important too. It gets harder to implement, but
Yeah.
sorry, Mr. Parsons and then Ms. Inman.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just two quick points. I really appreciate Ms. Clark's comments just now. I think that number 2 is, I don't think anybody would disagree that will be really helpful if applications are able to come in with this work done ahead of time. I think if there is interest in trying to move that forward, staff would certainly try and work over time to ramp up to being able to implement that. Because as you said, like not everybody is able to make those commitments right now to do the work ahead of time, just because the funding isn't there. So I think regionally that will be helpful if that kind of resource was available, especially for those jurisdictions that don't have the upfront funding available to advance engineering. But when it gets into the application filters, if that was done, everybody would benefit from that in terms of being able to have more realistic ideas of what the projects are going to look like and how they're going to move forward. So I think that could be something that could take place over time. The other point I wanted to make is that we haven't really talked about it today, but there has been discussion about what we've all lovingly called legacy projects. And if I think staff's opinion, and Miles, wave your hands really hard if you don't agree. I think staff's opinion is that if those legacy projects could be addressed, then we don't have concerns about the other cost overruns right now. We think that those are achievable, and the work that can be done through these 4 options on the screen would put us in a really good position moving forward. So if there was a way to kind of address those historic projects and move those into a place where they can be finished, then that might help us all at the end as well.
Yeah. And I know I need to get to Ms. Inman, but just to comment about the studies, Ms. McAdory, I know there are some like safety studies, STARS studies, and some VDOT potential funding available that Henrico has collaborated with VDOT on, that have helped us gather more information up front and have more successful applications. Would you want to share with TAC just some of the study options that are available through VDOT?
Sure. I mean, we have several different study programs. We have the AMP, which is Arterial Management Program. We have STARS strategically targeted, affordable, whatever solutions. We also have a general on-call. All of this is funding through our central office that is used for planning, to where, so we also have a host of data. Let me back up. We have a ton of data that we work every year to kind of identify where the V-Trans needs are that haven't been addressed, where safety, either segment or PSI intersections have been identified but not addressed, or even localities can come to us and we have a location we want to study. And what the district does, we put all the information together and we put in applications to our central office to get those studies. So we don't have a whole lot of input on what gets what gets chosen, but we can certainly ask the question. And what Sharon's mentioning, Henrico has gotten a few over the last couple of years where we get to the point in the study, we have existing conditions, forecasting, we come up with concepts, we do the full analysis, where you come out at the end with a preferred alternative and a cost estimate. And we are also ramping up. I know in the past there's been some situations where we've had planning level cost estimates, but now we're kicking out our preferred alternatives with smart scale ready estimates, so it can be plugged right into smart scale or any other funding like TAP or revenue sharing or anything else. And I think that is another thing that we've discussed that's going to try to help address future potential cost overruns, is that having that sort of smart scale ready estimate is pretty conservative.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Ms. Inman, thank you for your patience. Please go ahead.
No problem. Thank you. So yeah, and I think the stars and all the resources that VDOT, YPI bring to the table, that's great, right? We've all been engaged in those and they are very helpful and they have their place. However, I'm looking at now the agenda and it's saying that increasing project definition before selection requiring 30% design. Okay, so that changes from what I just saw, a range, to now requiring 30% design, which is a whole different animal. And then it says, reducing the TPO exposure to overruns by awarding funds for a single phase or fixed dollar amount. But doesn't that conflict with VDOT's desire and requirement now to fund the full phase? So how does the TPO suggest funding a single phase or a dollar amount for doing that kind of project development work? It just seems like these things are somewhat contradicting what's already on the book. So, and maybe I'm misreading it. If I am, please feel free to say, hey, that's not what we intend. But
no, and I think these were, and Miles, feel free to chime in after me. These were just ideas, and my intent, at least with reading this, was we weren't necessarily going to do all four. Maybe we'd choose one or two, but really what the consensus was. And I think, I had concerns about 30% design, because that has a lot of implications, and that's very different than the 10%. I agree, Amy.
Yeah, that's a way different process. Just way different in terms of.
But Miles, go ahead.
Sure. So, these are just examples that were given in the packet. So really the big bullet point, increased project definition before selection, is the key. The 10%, 30%, that was part of what we were open to the TAC discussion on. It was just that bigger point of moving somewhere right on that x-axis on the curve.
Right. I understand completely. And I appreciate that. It's just when you say requiring 30% design, you take something like that to the policy board, in their mind, that's what they're thinking, right? Okay, they're going to get us to 30% design. So I think this is great. And I think this is good conversation, but I don't believe it's ready right now to go to the board. So maybe we could have more discussion about this or refine this a little more and bring it back to next month. Would that be possible?
Yes, that was staff's intent. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yes, so that definitely is an option. And if that's what TAC would like to do, I would like, for the TAC members to think about these options, other options, how they propose to, which ones they support, which ones they don't. Maybe to have, and I'm thinking out loud here, maybe before the next TAC meeting, and I don't want to put Miles on the spot, or sending Miles and I what you, I don't know, what each jurisdiction is thinking about options, or what they are supporting, or entertaining the ideas of some of these ideas. may be helpful. And I know regarding the explanation for the cost increases that Miles sent out, I think we're missing some facts from 2 localities. If they could please, fill them in and get them to Miles by the end of this week, just so we can have everything documented. I think we've gotten verbal reasons from them, but I think it's important to document the cost overruns, the reasons why. Reading through those who did apply, I think who did reply, and it's in writing, it makes sense to me, some of those reasons. And I think it's important to address why there were cost increases and document that, because that was in the agenda on this item as number 1, provide an explanation for the cost increases in all cases, why it has exceeded its original budget. I am, of course, willing to entertain if we want to defer this to the next meeting, but I also want to make sure our next meeting is productive. So if the 2 localities that didn't respond could provide reasons for their cost overruns and get that to Miles by the end of the week. And what are folks' ideas on localities responding to Miles before the TAC, and myself before the next TAC meeting, about some of these possible policy changes they support.
Do you need a motion for that, Sharon?
That's a good question.
Just be in favor, everybody's in favor of that.
Is everybody in? I don't know if I can do a voice vote to defer it, Chet, or.
Well,
or
I think at this point, if you just don't take action,
yeah,
just defer it anyway.
Okay. Any feedback from other folks about, sending something to Miles and I before the next meeting for what you're thinking about, what you're comfortable with some of these options, or pros and cons? All right, assuming I'm not hearing anything, so I'm assuming that's all right. And my understanding is we are not taking any action on this item today, and we will cover it in our March TAC meeting. And we'll be sure to let TPO know that we are taking this under very serious discussion and consideration, and want to make sure we hear from all the localities and that they're comfortable with this and think we are able to implement this successfully. All right, so hearing nothing else, we will move on to the next agenda item, which is number 12, fiscal year 24 to fiscal year 29 STBG CMAQ allocations for existing project requests. This is an action item. And Mr. Bushing, if you could please proceed with the presentation.
Sure. Thank you again, Madam Chair. This is going to be a quick presentation. So we had a very lengthy discussion in January about the existing projects. We had the sponsors explain the rationale for all of the requests and why the projects needed additional funding where they were. The staff report on summarized and the summary of the requests were included as attachments in the agenda, so you can reference everything from the previous discussion. And TAC ultimately did defer action last month. These were the projects with requests. I've highlighted the ones that staff felt there was pretty clear consensus from the discussion on. And I think there were 4 remaining ones which we didn't have a clear sense of a consensus one way or another from the TAC by the end of the meeting. So these are the outstanding requests. The action that's requested is to make a recommendation on additional funding for each of these projects and these requests, and those recommendations would be incorporated into the allocations plan that would come back to you next month. So I'm happy to pull up any of the project details, anything else that we need for the discussion, but since we discussed it at length, we don't have anything else to share on this one.
All right. Yes, go ahead, Ms. Smith.
I vaguely remember that discussion last month, and feel comfortable with the highlighted projects receiving additional funding. I'll make that motion. I'm sure there'll be discussion.
Madam Chair, Barb, was the motion to approve the highlighted?
Yes.
Madam Chair, second.
Is there any discussion? I have discussion, but I want to wait and see if there's any others. Ms. Inman?
Again, I apologize since I'm new. Those UPC codes, do they reference an actual project and the rationale for the cost increase in the agenda?
Correct. So in the agenda packet, there's attachment A and B to this agenda item. Attachment A is a spreadsheet summarizing the requests that came from the applicants originally. And attachment B was the staff analysis that was sort of the project history and a staff recommendation for each item.
Okay. Yeah, again, I think, okay. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Vidunas.
Yeah, so I was going through the recommendations in the package. Maybe I'm not reading this right, but like the Hanover request, page 19 and 20, it says staff recommends not funding this request. Where are these? So it's not aligning with what's on the screen is, I guess, my question.
So, yeah, so at our last TAC meeting, there was some verbal discussion about funding these that were getting ready to go to construction to keep them moving along. So I think these were, go ahead, Miles, please clarify.
Sure. This is the actual amount requested for each project. So this is the request amounts. The staff recommendation for all but 2 of the projects was not to award funding.
Right.
But this is just based on the request amount, and then based on the discussion, staff felt that the 5 highlighted projects were the ones that we heard a general consensus on moving forward with. Funding those requests. So that's the amount that would actually be awarded for each of the projects.
I got you. Thanks for clarifying that.
So as Henrico, I mean, I see the importance of, funding existing projects, and that's kind of always my understanding, been the direction to where there's the appropriate reasons for a cost increase and the requests are given and following the process that, traditionally we have funded these existing projects. I'm not comfortable saying that why we're only choosing the ones going to construction and not the ones that have PE and right of way, because, if Enrico would have known that, I would have applied for some of our legacies that are getting ready to go to construction. And I think I propose that these all be funded because there are shortfalls on the existing projects. So that's where I stand. I think they should all be funded given these reasonings, and not just the ones that are going to the construction phase. So that may affect my vote on the proposed motion. Go ahead, Ms. Inman.
Okay, sorry. So what you're saying is the highlighted that you have here, these are the ones you're recommending approval.
The highlighted ones were the ones that there was a TAC consensus on last meeting. The other 4 were still under discussion. There wasn't really as much of a clear direction from TAC. So this is not the staff recommendation. This is from last month's discussion of the TAC.
Okay, so the spreadsheet that you have in the agenda package, I'm not clear what you are and aren't recommending then.
Sure. So the staff recommendation was to fund 112042, the Ashland project, and the 118143, the TPO project. And the remainder of the projects, staff felt were either already funded or had small overruns, which could be addressed other places, and there was time to address them. The TAC discussion last month essentially felt that the requests were coming in because there weren't funds available in other places, and that's why the requests were made. And so that was the direction was to, or the consensus, it seemed to be building toward funding them at the requested levels. And so the four that are not highlighted are projects that aren't quite at construction, and that seemed to have been the basis, as Ms. Smidler mentioned, for the prioritizing the 5 from last discussion. But again, there was no final decision made on it. It was just that was staff's sense of the consensus that was there.
Okay, so just one more question then. So if we were to fund all of these requests, where is that money coming from?
So the TPO has about an estimated 18.2 million in RSTP to award for this round, and this would use about, I believe it's 14.6 of that 18.2. So it would be most of the available RSTP for this round would go toward these existing projects.
So I mean, so essentially then that's pretty much, I mean, that really limits any new projects
Correct.
being applied for. That's something I couldn't, I mean, I couldn't support that right now, not knowing all of these projects. I mean, maybe the 2 you have that you've already, that staff is recommending, if those are already under construction or getting ready to go to construction, and they needed to fully fund that construction phase, then I guess I can see that part of it. But funding everything just because there's a, you know, a shortfall and there's nowhere else to get the money, I guess, then you're taking away any potential for new projects for other localities going forward.
Ms. Smith?
I think we really had a lot of detailed discussion about all these projects at our last meeting. And unless we want to go back and have that discussion again, in my mind, there's justification and reasoning to keep these projects moving. We all know that the market right now is very unpredictable. Well, it is predictable. It's predictably high, and delaying progress on the projects is just going to mean increased cost. I think that we can have the discussion about the remaining 4 if it wasn't clear that from our last meeting's discussion there was consensus on them. But because I felt comfortable with what we talked about last meeting on the 5 that are highlighted, I'm good moving forward with those. I felt like the remaining 4 weren't at the point necessarily that they really needed for us to consider that funding. And we could wait until next round. But if we want to talk about the other 4, we can do that.
Thank you. I was just concerned about the precedent being set with the construction phase, and I agree. We should be open to alternatives and think of how we can fund this. I think, Henrico's 109-194 was the North Parham Road Sidewalk and Signal Project. I think that one was, I had asked this RSTP and Smart Scale funding, and I had asked VDOT if there was additional district funding, so to cover that shortfall. And my understanding is they're still looking into it, unless Ms. McAdory, you had another update, but that was my last understanding of that update. And that one, technically, since it's under, it's I think a 5.5% increase. Technically, it doesn't need to, it could just go to the TAC for approval and not go to TPO if that was so desired, just due to the level of increase. And as far as Henrico, the 115769, that's Libby Avenue Road Diet. And that's just refining the estimate and inflation to reflect the that's reflecting the cost increase. I'm not sure, Barb, if you wanted to give an update on 113846 and then Dirona on 104281.
Our request reflects the market that we're in right now. So our estimate is updated to include bid risk and additional contingency just to deal with the current market. But we're in PE right now. I don't think we've moved to right of way. So we've got time. We can keep watching things. Might go up, might go down.
Thank you, Barb. And our Henrico's too are in PE as well. Go ahead, Ms. Inman.
Oh, I guess I'd like to just make a motion that we approve the projects that staff have recommended that are going into construction, and then continue to watch these other projects that are in PE.
Okay,
Madam Chair, there's a motion and a second on the floor.
Yes, there is currently a motion and a second on the floor.
There already a motion?
I think, yes, Barb had made a motion. Ms. Smith had made a motion. And sorry, there's a lot of discussion. In her motion, my understanding was to approve, the ones highlighted in yellow. And it was seconded by Ms. Clark.
Okay, I'm sorry. I missed that.
No, you're fine. It was a lot of discussion.
Yeah.
Ms. Clark, would you like to provide an update about 104281?
Sure. I have, if Ms. Firestone, can you bring Lamont Benjamin over, our engineer?
Yes. Okay, I believe he's moved over now.
Mr. Benjamin, feel free to go ahead and give us some background about UPC 104281.
It's 104281. Good morning to everyone. 104281 is the Deepwater Terminal Road project. We're currently still in the right-of-way phase, so we do have some time on this project that we could wait on. So if it's not funded at this time, it's okay. We still have some time on this one.
Thank you for that update. Ms. Smith?
I'd like to call for the question and take a vote.
All right. Ms. Firestone, if you could please take a roll call vote.
Motion just one more time, sorry. Just repeat the motion.
Ms. Smith, could you repeat the motion?
The motion is to approve the request or allocations of the requested amounts for the highlighted projects that are up on the screen. Did that make sense?
Was that seconded?
Yes, it was seconded by Ms. Clark.
Great, thank you.
So if you could take a roll call vote, Ms. Clark.
Ms. Amos?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Vadunez?
Aye.
Chair Smidler?
Aye.
Okay. Ms. Inman?
Aye.
Ms. Clark?
Aye.
Ms. Robinson,
Aye.
Mr. Parsons,
Aye.
and Ms. McAdory.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Hey, Ms. Firestone, this is John O'Keefe, and I was aye as well.
I'm sorry, Mr. O'Keefe. I will note that in the minutes. Thank
Thank
you.
you, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
All righty. Let's see, number 13, fiscal year 24, fiscal year 27 TIP Connect to RVA 2045 conformity projects list. Mr. Bushing.
And thank you again, Madam Chair. So this item is related to the TIP update, which is currently underway. So as you all know, the region is in attainment for current air quality standards. However, under the 1997 8-hour ozone standards, a portion of the TPO region was not in attainment and later achieved attainment. So it is a maintenance area. As you all recall, there was a court case a few years ago, which requires us to continue doing the conformity analysis, even though we are now under attainment for all current standards, which are more stringent. So the projects for the conformity analysis are projects from the constrained long-range plan and the draft TIP, which were within that former maintenance area. And that also includes any local or private projects that are regionally significant that need to be included in the TIP or the LRTP. So the kind of the next steps in the process is the TPO has to approve the Richmond portion. Those projects are all combined with Tri-Cities area projects for the regional conformity assessment. And then we'll hold the interagency consultation before the March 14th TAC meeting, so before next month's TAC meeting, to keep the TIP and the conformity assessment moving forward on schedule. As part of that, TAC will need to open the public comment for both documents. So this is something we've done in previous years as well. So the action that's requested is that the policy board is a recommendation that the policy board approve the attached list of the ungrouped projects from the TIP and the Connect RVA 2045 projects as the universe of projects for air quality conformity analysis, and that the board also authorizes TAC to review and open the public comment on the draft TIP and conformity assessment at the March 14th meeting. I'm happy to answer any more questions. I will say the draft TIP is not before you. In general, we try and get those to you at the same time. However, we're still working on the project list. We only finalized it on the 25th of last month. So still got a little work to do on the document, but that'll be for the March 14th meeting. So all of these will be moving forward concurrently. But with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Miles? All right, hearing none, this is an action item. Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to recommend that we move the project list forward and advertise or ask the TPO board to authorize TAC to advertise the public comment period.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing and seeing none. Ms. Firestone, could you please take a roll call vote?
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Amos,
Aye.
Ms. Smith,
Aye.
Mr. Badunez,
Aye.
Chair Smidler,
Aye.
Ms. Inman,
Aye.
Ms. Clark,
Aye.
Ms. Robinson,
Aye.
Mr. Parsons,
Aye.
Mr. O'Keefe,
Aye.
and Ms. McAdory.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries.
All right. Next up, number 14 on the agenda, Smart Scale Recommendation Review, focusing on CVTA leveraging impacts. This is not an action item. Mr. Parsons, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
This was an update that we provided to the CBTA TAC yesterday as well. what you see on the screen and what was included in your agenda is a summary of smart scale applications in round 5, sorted by jurisdiction or responsible agency, starting at the top of this is page 104 with the town of Ashland and moving alphabetically through the jurisdictions in the region. It also includes applications by Plan RBA and by the TPO. What staff wanted to do, and this is kind of a first take on understanding the impacts of leveraging on our smart scale applications in round 5. This is the first time that we as a region have been able to utilize CBTA regional funding as a tool to hopefully improve our chances in winning smart scale funds. And what we wanted to do was to actually try and start developing an assessment of what the results are, or at this point, what the staff recommendations are, and how it looks like we're gonna shake out. So just going from left to right, the 4 green columns are basic information about the projects that were applied for, including the sponsor and the year of expenditure estimate that for each project. The 2 purple columns in the center are the benefit score that was assigned to this project through the smart scale evaluation, and then the benefit cost score when you factor in the cost of the project with that benefit score. The 2 blue columns just to the right of that are Plan RBA staff or TPO staff added our understanding of the regional CBTA funding that has been leveraged, and then a summary of the total amount of funding that has been leveraged. So it could be CBTA plus local or other sources. Through this iterative process, and Miles is the mastermind behind this, but we developed some assessment of basically if the project was successful, if it was not successful, I think more importantly, what would have been the additional leverage needed to get that project to a point where the scoring was over that threshold of the projects that did receive a staff recommendation as opposed to those that did not. So you can see there's a wide range of leveraging amounts in that the left-hand yellow column that showed, based on what was provided in terms of leveraged amounts and the year of expenditure estimate, what that additional leverage should have been, in this case, for round 5 only, to make that project successful in terms of the statewide competition. There are a couple projects that were, based on this assessment, well underfunded. There's tens of millions of dollars still needed in leveraging to make it competitive. There were also, on the other end of the spectrum, a couple projects that may have been successful if only they received a couple $100,000. So this is really, as you mentioned in the introduction, this is an information item, and it's our first draft at developing this type of assessment, but really to think about what the impacts of leveraging were, and probably some lessons learned as we think about the next round in 2 years, and what we might need to do to position better to compete on a statewide scale. I think another important thing to note is that while this sheet only shows round 5 scoring, we're kind of developing a broader tool to look at all 5 rounds of smart scale and kind of compile the best and worst of each round to see how projects would compete no matter what the scoring criteria were. And I think the footnote to put at the bottom of this is round 6, the scoring criteria are probably going to change again. We don't know what that change is going to entail, but at the end of the day, we want to be able to provide all the applicants in our region with the best information available about how likely a project is to get funded based on the application and the materials that we put together. Be happy to take any questions, and I'll defer to Miles for all the hard ones.
I appreciate you guys taking the time to put this together, summarize it, and what we can learn. So any questions for Miles and Chet? Yeah, there were a lot of smart scale applications in the Richmond district, and I know VDOT worked hard as well as all the localities and submitting those applications, and the consultants and Plan RVA staff as well. All right, hearing no questions or comments. All right, hearing none, we'll move on to agency updates. And DRPT is first. Mr. Wagner.
Morning, everyone.
Morning.
I'll be very brief this morning. You all have already taken action to adopt our Tier 2 Transit Asset Management Plan, which is mostly a reminder for our MPOs who are a little behind schedule. So thank you for doing that. And next, just want to give you all an update. Obviously, FTA has released their NOFOs for buses and bus facilities program, as well as the low or no emission vehicle program, which is a great opportunity. I know GRTC has been successful in the past, so wanted to let you all know tomorrow at 10 a.m. we will be hosting discretionary grant writing workshop focused on these two programs specifically. So we have some information on how to register for the webinar. Again, it's tomorrow at 10 a.m., as well as some additional updates on these two programs. I'm happy to share the link in the chat, and also Chet and Miles both have our updates, so we can share that so everyone has the link as well. And then lastly, we obviously have the new 2020 census urbanized areas, and so that's obviously going to affect our annual apportionments. Got some good resources on how that can affect us statewide, and there was a webinar on February 9th, which hopefully some folks were able to attend, but happy to also share some more information and resources on that. But otherwise, that's all I have on our end, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner, for sharing those grant opportunities and other updates. Any questions for DRPT? All right. Hearing none, we'll get ready to move on to the next. And I see Joe Vidunas had put in the chat, Miles, if you could please send out the Excel version of the Smart Scale spreadsheet to TAC members, that would be appreciated. Thank you. Next agency update is GRTC, which would be Ms. Robinson.
Hi, good morning. Yes, I'll just kind of rattle through my list here. First, we want to start it by just welcoming our new CEO, Cheryl Adams, and Chief of Staff, Adrian Torres, into their new positions. I think most are, known throughout this committee, but they've been at GRTC for a number of years, so we're excited to have them in their new roles. We have our board meeting next week, Tuesday, the 21st, 8 a.m. at GRTC. Our downtown transfer station is now set to open May 21st, 2023. That's to accommodate supply chain issues, safety measures, additional operator training, and will align with the May booking that we have set. We have several new amenity installations this past month, including 2 new shelters on Laburnum Avenue in Henrico, 4 new benches, 3 of which are in Chesterfield on our current 3B. So we just wanted to say thank you to our jurisdictional partners for installing the concrete landing pads to make these upgrades possible. They look amazing. We also want to highlight that we have a new public timetable design, coincides with our January schedule that we just put out. So those can be seen on our paper timetables as well as on the website. And then lastly here, to commemorate Black history makers, past, present, and future, we have destination sign codes that announce GRTC celebrates Black History Month. That'll be seen on our buses throughout February.
Thank you for the update, Ms. Robinson. Congratulations to Ms. Torres and Ms. Adams. That's definitely an exciting announcement. And yes, and Henrico is super excited to get more transit infrastructure and partner with GRTC on that, as I'm sure Chesterfield is as well. Any questions for GRTC? Hearing none. Next is Ride Finders, Mr. O'Keefe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ride Finders has been working with the HR at the Amazon RIC1 facility, which is located in Dinwiddie. We are working to assist them with commute options for their employees. We've already done, with the help of GRTC, a density plot map and created a survey for them to go out to employees. So we're waiting on Amazon to send the survey out to the employees, and we'll continue to work through that process with them on that. We're also working with HR at Shameen Hotels. Shameen owns several hotels in Richmond, Henrico, and Chesterfield counties. And they're having some transportation issues for some of their employees at certain hotels. So we're working with them on how we can assist them with van pool and carpool options to some of the hotels that they're having problems where transit maybe doesn't reach with first mile, last mile, or just a lack of transit at some of those hotels. So we're working with HR and staffing at there as well. Kind of keeping in line with that, we did meet with Barb in Chesterfield County to discuss transportation options, maybe on the new Lego facility, and as well as the Amazon efforts we've done at the Meadowville event location as well. We gave some feedback and some options, and we're working with Barb on that. So I do appreciate Barb in Chesterfield County reaching out to Ride Finders and working with us. And we look forward to moving forward and seeing how we can assist them with that as well. Also continuing to work with VDOT, and I do want to thank Liz McAdory for helping me on the replacements of our signs. I still currently have 6 of them missing, but Liz and I did chat last week, and I do want to thank her for her assistance with this signage project with VDOT on that. We did submit 2 commuter assistance program grants to DRPT, and we also did share a lot of notices and announcements on Facebook and Twitter, from Chesterfield, New Kent, Henrico, DRPT, and Plan RBA on our social media sites. And with that, Madam Chair, that's all I have, and I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. O'Keefe. Any questions for Ride Finders? All right. Next is VDOT, Ms. Mueller.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I will highlight a few things on my report for this month. I'll start with the next CTB meetings. The next workshop meeting is scheduled for next Tuesday, February the 21st at 10 a.m. and the action meeting is scheduled for Wednesday at 9 a.m. Moving on to Smart Scale, the project scorecards and staff recommended funding scenario have been presented to the CTB and the public in January. I have included OEP's workshop presentation on Smart Scale Round 5 scores in my January CTB link. If you would like to revisit Brooke's presentation, as always, Ms. Firestone will post the report on the Plan RBA website. The CTB will now develop potential revisions to the staff recommended funding scenario between now and April, and final approval of applications recommended for funding by the CTB is expected in June. With Smart Scale Round 5 coming to an end, we are already looking to how we can continue to improve the program for future rounds. Secretary Miller has requested a comprehensive review of the program. I have included a link that will take you to a survey, which will now remain open through March the 1st. That is an extension just to make sure everyone has enough time to provide comments. Moving on to the 6-year improvement program, the development of the FY24 through 29 SIP will begin this spring and is anticipated to include in-person public meetings. I will provide information as the schedule is developed. And last but not least, I have one public notice to share with you, willingness to accept comments through the end of today regarding the restriction of through truck traffic on Stage Road in Hanover County. And I have included the ad in my update. And that's all I have for you today.
Thank you, Ms. Mueller. Any questions for VDOT?
I have a
All right.
question.
Sure, go ahead, Barb.
Nicole, did you say the deadline for comments on Smart Scale was extended?
Yes, it was until March the 1st, Barb.
Oh, good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, next item on the agenda is future meeting topics. Of course, we'll have the one we deferred today about the project cost estimates and overruns on next month's agenda. Also listed is DRPT, Virginia Statewide Rail Plan, scenario planning, CVTA project prioritization updates, and transit modernization study update. And if anybody would like to add any additional ones, please let us know. Mr. Parsons, did you have a comment?
I was just going to add, if it's of interest to the body, there are 2 BRT feasibility studies that are underway, and it might be interesting for TAC. I'm sure the steering committees and GRTC would love the feedback on them as well.
Yeah, I'm actually going to ask if we could get an update on the north-south BRT corridor study in particular.
That sounds like, yes, we should, if you could definitely add that to the agenda for future meeting topics.
Absolutely.
That would be great. Thank you. Next on the agenda is TAC member comments. And any comments from TAC members? Okay, hearing none. Our next meeting is scheduled for March 14th. Planned to be virtual unless we hear otherwise. And this meeting is considered adjourned at 10:33 a.m. I hope everyone has a great day and week, and we will talk soon. Take care, everyone.
Bye.